And I think that's going to overtake Europe. And as that overtakes Europe and work with them, then I think our position with the Chinese will also improve greatly. The Chinese, as we've discussed many, many times, they are not about war. They don't want a war. They're about business. And, it's like the old story, if you leave your wallet on the table, somebody's going to pick it up and take it. Well, if you expect the Chinese to stand around and not take your IP when you present it to them in your own laboratories and universities, well, you're crazy. So we have some policing and work here at home to do to safeguard ourselves. But there's no justification or rationale for war with China. So all of this works together. And as I said it earlier yesterday, if President Trump presses forward in these directions, I would think he and probably President Putin jointly could receive the Nobel Peace Prize for what they're doing. And I think Lavrov is trying to make a point. And the thing we have to understand now, and I'm sure President Trump grasps much of this, there's no trust between them and us. That's been completely destroyed. This insistence on this false narrative about Russia's criminality, Russia's responsibility for what happened, Russia's atrocities, all this nonsense, that's not going to be forgotten quickly. Not just by the government. People here in the United States don't understand. The entire Russian population remains enraged. And just because we step forward and say, look, this was wrong. And, from the very beginning, I kept urging publicly, because I have no way to address the president directly, stand there and tell everybody, this is not my war. I didn't start it. I don't want it. And I'm going to end it and let it go. He's finally gotten there now, and he's beginning to say those things. That's going to help enormously, but he can't undo the damage quickly. And we're not going to get a shake and bake plan for immediate cessation of all hostilities. It's going to take time.
The truth is far darker than you think. A Nobel Peace Prize for Trump and Putin. A world where China takes what it wants and Russia seethes with unrelenting fury. Macgregor just shattered the illusion of diplomacy. This isn't about peace. It's about power, betrayal, and a future that could spiral out of control. Douglas Macgregor's analysis paints a grim picture of the battlefield, but while he speaks of caution and strategic recalibration across the Atlantic, the rhetoric is turning far more aggressive. In a dramatic shift, French President Emmanuel Macron has issued what many experts interpret as a declaration of war against Russia. His recent statements at the European summit have sent shockwaves through geopolitical circles, hinting at a potential new chapter in Europe's confrontation with Moscow. And as Macron raises the stakes, fierce battles rage on the ground in Ukraine, particularly near Toretsk and Pokrovsk, where the Russian military is pushing forward with brutal intensity. The stage is set for a dramatic escalation, both in words and on the battlefield. The European summit on March 6, 2025, was meant to be a platform for diplomacy, but it quickly turned into a battleground of rhetoric. Emmanuel Macron, in an unprecedented display of defiance, made a series of statements that many military and political experts have described as nothing short of a war cry. He declared that peace will return to our continent only with a pacified Russia. This statement alone left the world wondering, what exactly does Macron mean by pacified? The implications are chilling. To many, this phrase suggests a Russia stripped of its military might. No missiles, no rockets, no nuclear arsenal. Just a hollowed-out nation reduced to its raw resources. Of course, such an outcome is a fantasy in the real world, and the Kremlin wasted no time in dismissing Macron's words as delusional. But what followed was even more provocative. Macron openly opposed any peace settlement in Ukraine on current terms, making it clear that France and its European allies would not tolerate a frozen conflict or a Russian-dictated ceasefire. More controversially, he raised the possibility of sending European Union troops directly into Ukraine. This statement immediately sent shivers down the spines of many NATO leaders, who have long feared that such a move could trigger direct confrontation with Russia. But Macron didn't stop there. He proposed a discussion on the use of France's nuclear weapons to protect Europe. This is a seismic shift. For decades, nuclear deterrence has been a carefully managed doctrine, with France keeping its arsenal largely as a national safeguard. But now, Macron is opening the door to a broader European nuclear strategy, one that directly counters Russia's constant nuclear threats. The message is clear. Europe will not be intimidated. Even more alarming are Macron's warnings about Russia's future military ambitions. According to French intelligence projections, Moscow is planning to mobilize 3 million soldiers and produce 4,000 tanks by 2030. If true, this would represent an unprecedented escalation, far beyond anything seen in the conflict so far. Whether these figures are accurate or part of a broader psychological strategy to rally European support remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, France is preparing for a long-term confrontation. Macron's speech was not just about military posturing. He made it evident that France is ready to stand alone if necessary. While he expressed hope that the United States would remain a steadfast ally, he also warned that Europe must prepare for a future where America is no longer by its side. This is a direct acknowledgement of the growing uncertainty surrounding U.S. foreign policy, particularly with the upcoming presidential election that could see a major shift in Washington's stance on Ukraine. To reinforce his stance, Macron accused Russia of violating the 2014 Minsk agreements and made it clear that agreements with Moscow cannot be trusted. This is a historical counterpunch, because for years, Russia has accused the West of breaking these agreements. Now, Macron is throwing that accusation back at the Kremlin, insisting that Russia never intended to honor them in the first place. While Macron's words shook diplomatic circles, the reality on the battlefield remains grim. The situation near Toretsk and Pokrovsk has escalated into a bloodbath. Russian forces are advancing aggressively, using a combination of artillery barrages, drone strikes, and relentless infantry assaults to grind down Ukrainian defenses. By the morning of March 6th, pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that the strategic settlement of Kavka was on the verge of falling to Russian forces. This is a critical loss, as it brings the Russians closer to cutting off key Ukrainian supply routes. Russian drones now have full control over the region, turning the roads into a death trap for Ukrainian forces trying to move reinforcements or supplies. Video footage has emerged showing multiple Ukrainian vehicles being obliterated in precision strikes, highlighting the lethal efficiency of Russian aerial reconnaissance. But Ukraine is not going down without a fight. In Toretsk, a city that has already been reduced to ruins, Ukrainian forces launched a counteroffensive in a desperate bid to regain lost ground. The fighting has been nothing short of apocalyptic. According to battlefield reports, the Ukrainians have managed to push back Russian forces and reclaim up to 15% of the city. The key northern mine, a vital stronghold, is back under Ukrainian control, forcing the Russians into a chaotic retreat. However, the battle is far from over. Russian reinforcements are pouring in, and reports suggest that Moscow is preparing for a fresh assault, possibly timed to coincide with major diplomatic moves in Europe. This isn't just about battlefield tactics. It's psychological warfare designed to weaken European resolve at the exact moment Macron and other leaders are debating their next steps. As Ukraine fights for survival, a new and devastating development has emerged. The United States has stopped transmitting intelligence to Kyiv. Reports indicate that at 2 p.m. Kyiv time, Washington abruptly cut off intelligence sharing, including target designation for long-range weapons such as HIMARS. This effectively blinds Ukraine's ability to launch precision strikes, making their situation even more precarious. With European intelligence capabilities nowhere near the level of the U.S., Ukraine now faces an even steeper uphill battle. This sudden shift raises ominous questions. Is Washington preparing to push Ukraine toward negotiations with Russia? Are U.S. officials beginning to prioritize their global confrontation with China over the war in Ukraine? Could this signal the beginning of a Western divide, with Europe and the U.S. moving in different directions on Ukraine? Meanwhile, tensions between the United States and China are also escalating. Both nations have made ominous statements about their military readiness, further complicating an already chaotic geopolitical landscape. If Washington's focus shifts away from Ukraine, Macron's warnings about Europe needing to stand alone may come true much sooner than expected. Macron's bold statements, the brutal combat near Toretsk and Pokrovsk, and the sudden intelligence cutoff from the U.S. all point to one thing: we are entering a dangerous new phase of the war. The coming weeks will be pivotal. If Macron follows through on his threats, we could see a dramatic escalation in European military involvement. Meanwhile, Ukraine is in a desperate race against time, fighting tooth and nail to hold the line as Russia intensifies its offensives. And with the U.S. pulling back, the ultimate question looms: will Europe take up the mantle and go all in against Russia? Or is Ukraine about to be abandoned to its fate?